hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up, because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Armor of Truth Live number 244. Let's get the right screen up here for you. I've got a little something new for you to look at. How about that? Testing the waters. Well, the United Nations has just put out in the last week this thing. It's our common agenda. Ours. It's ours. All of us together. This is our agenda, our common agenda. Don't you feel included now? Antonio Gutierrez says, we're at an inflection point in history. At an inflection point. It's an inflection point, folks, so you need to be aware that we're bouncing. We're going to bounce off the walls. And our biggest shared test since the Second World War. Humanity faces a stark... Is it really? Is this really the biggest shared test? Anyway, humanity faces a stark and urgent choice. A breakdown or a breakthrough. The disease, we'll just leave that out of this show, is upending our world, threatening our health, destroying economies and livelihoods, deepening poverty and inequalities. You know what? Those things are happening, but it's not this thing that's doing it. It's these people. Conflicts continue to rage and worsen the disastrous effects of a changing climate. Well, I mean, how could you go wrong? You've got climate change for babies now, right? Shouldn't this be fixed? We've got books about climate change for babies now. Shouldn't this be solved already? Moving on. The disastrous effects of climate change. Famine, floods, fires, alliteration, extreme heat threaten our very existence. Look, I think we know what's threatening our very existence. For millions of people around the world, poverty, discrimination, violence, and exclusion. There you go. Now we're getting down to it. Exclusion are denying them their rights to the basic necessities of life, which are, according to the United Nations, health, safety, vaccination against disease, basic necessities of life, clean water to drink, a plate of food, but no meat, and a seat in a classroom, as long as it's an approved classroom. Increasingly, people are turning their backs on the values of trust and solidarity with one another. Well, why do you think that is? They don't trust their leaders. Anyway, for people, for the planet, for prosperity, for peace, I'm telling you, whoever's writing the speeches for the UN has got a knack for alliteration. Last year, on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, member states agreed that our challenges are interconnected. They agreed. How did they agree? That is why our common agenda is, above all, an agenda of action designed to accelerate the implementation of existing agreements, including the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course. First, Now is the time to re-embrace global solidarity and find new ways to work together for the common good. How do we define common good? You see, we don't ever get definitions out of these folks. What do they, well, this must include global, of course, more jabs to deliver against this disease into the arms of millions of people who are still denied this basic life-saving measure. Moreover, it must include urgent and bold steps to address the triple crisis. That's the new term, the polycrisis of climate disruption, biodiversity loss, and pollution destroying our planet. Okay. So, that's your message from the United Nations. Listen to this piece here from, well, first of all, we're at an inflection point, Gutierrez says. But even when they're trying to sound hopeful, there's something devious in there, right? You can sense it. These people think in terms of utilitarianism. They're very pragmatic. They'll give you platitudes about spiritual ideas, but they're thinking pragmatically. In other words, whatever it takes to get their goal accomplished. Right? Remember last night or a couple nights ago, our show where we talked about Niccolo Machiavelli and the Prince. The ends justify the means. Whatever you have to do. And you take a guy like Bill Gates or Yuval Harari, the reason they're so disconnected is because they're surrounded by a class of like-minded people who are always encouraging this, right? They have no reason to change. They have no reason to reconsider their perspectives. They really believe they're right. They really believe that they're just. So let's look at this. Some of the goals, the history and goals of Agenda 21, that's what this common agenda is. It has to do with the goals of Agenda 21. You can call it 2030. You can call it whatever you want. It's the same thing. And that is to reduce the size of the population, plain and simple, and to rescue the earth from white men and capitalism. That's the goal. That's what Gutierrez is calling for there in his speech. What must be the response? The title of today's show is Secret Agendas. Should Christians stop the global dictator class? Should we do something, or should we just sit back and watch it all play out? What is the right response? We get a lot of comments because our position clearly is, yes, we respond. There's something for you to do as a Christian in the face of all we see out here right now. What must be reduced rather than the population is the size of government. And what must be rescued is common sense. That's where we are. So here's a piece. Aurelio Pecchii. I believe that's how you say his name. I looked it up. Aurelio Pecchii. Let me so you can see what I'm talking about here. This is a book called The Chasm Ahead. All right. This is Aurelio Pecchii is the founder of the Club of Rome. The Limits to Growth paper. You guys remember this stuff? This is from 1969. The Chasm Ahead. I'm going to read some selections from it. This would be from pages 173 to 175. To control population growth and size, we have now reached a point where we can contemplate no path other than systematic family planning under the aegis of moral and scientific authorities, and directed possibly by an appropriate international organization. Of course, an appropriate international organization. I can get this up here for you and get to the right page. There we go. So I'm reading from page 173. You can see the words control are highlighted there. I mean, if I can make that bigger for you. Yeah, a little bit better. That's not great, I know, but come on. Give me a break. He says, in any case, it's the bottom paragraph on the right, in any case, what seems indispensable to start with is a generalized recognition of facts and their cold logic, on the basis of which all or most peoples must unite and declare that humanity is going to face unprecedented calamity and that everything will get out of control if it cannot reasonably control its numbers. And when he says numbers, he's talking about population. Okay. 1969. Did you hear what he just said? You're going to face unprecedented calamity from the climate. We're going to run out of stuff. The only calamity we've experienced has come from other people. It goes on to say on page 174. It doesn't want to turn. Come on now. There we go. Page 174. He says, what I do know, however, is that a world population plan is pressing, and that one day it will come. We must achieve some measure of birth control in a civilized manner, largely by persuasion, he says, education, and the diffusion of contraceptives through responsible decision of the parents and self-rules of restraint. So, getting more interesting now. He says, otherwise, now pay attention here. I'll go full screen. Top left of the screen there, if you're following along at home. Let's get it. There we go. That's a little better. I know it's kind of blurry. Otherwise, some solution will come the hard way. I will cite 3 possible solutions. He says, one of them will be biological. Nature, which maintains so many balances, will see to it that human incontinence will be remedied through some new germ or virus. He wrote this in 1969. Or constrictive, I think that should say contraceptives, right? Yeah, the other is, one is biological, another is, no, he says constrictive, he does say. Another is constrictive and prophylactic. The day may not be far off when, by grafting of population from one region to another, forced exodus or mass sterilization, or with the help of other clean methods, biochemistry might suggest a ceiling on population, or new births will be enforced, right? Will be allowed to have children. In some nations, by due process of law. In others, perhaps by international measure. So, there you go. The United Nations will have to get involved to help with this. Goes on to write in an essay by Professor J.D. Bernal called Enormity or Logic and Hypocrisy and the Ultimate Solution. It says, there is no limit to human folly and callousness in the sense that all will end as the only compassionate and rational solution left with the elimination of all surplus humans. Of all surplus humans. I can't highlight that for you, but right there, it's maybe that helps. Surplus humans. Bottom left, about a third of the way up. Who will, of course, belong to the poor of the world. The elimination of all surplus humans who will, of course, belong to the poor of the world. He says, no comment is necessary. In conclusion, we must firmly fix in our minds that our best option to solve the population, environmental, and food control problem is a concerted, revolutionary, long-term plan conceived and accomplished with a forward vision of the world and by means of a radically new type of intercontinental dialogue and collaboration. In other words, to create a turning point in the history of relations among the various human societies. So there you go. That's Aurelio Pecchii from 1969. Laying it down for you. So you catch the theme, right? Secret agendas. You catch the theme here. It's always been about population control in some sense. Let's look at these stories right quick. A couple of these right off the top. Carson Wentz, he was a quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles. He was, as of now, I don't know who he played with. I can't remember who he played with last year, but he's a free agent as of the time this article was printed. Well, he shot a big black bear, a big brown bear. It's a massive black bear, it says, in Alaska. So he went hunting, as a lot of athletes do. New York Post reported that the NFL free agent quarterback Carson Wentz infuriated animal lovers after he killed a giant black bear during a recent hunting trip with his brother in Alaska. Wentz posted a photo on Instagram showing him smiling next to the dead bear, impressed by his kill. Well, definitely. Look at this thing. This thing's enormous. Let's see if we can get a shot of that thing. That is huge. Yeah, so so they're outraged about this. Is killing innocent animals bad? That's what they say. These are innocent animals, right? He said the problem they had with him is he had this on his bucket list. Right, there you go. He's got a bucket list. Check. I wonder if I can get that up here. Oh, there you go. It's going to show us in some Instagram. There you go. He's got bucket list. Check. Got the opportunity to spot and stalk black bear in one of our new favorite places on earth, Alaska. Incredible trip and an incredible animal. So, the guy's hunting. It sounds like he has a lot of respect for nature and these animals. And if you notice what he's using to hunt with there, using a compound bow. Right? He's got a bow there. It takes a lot of skill. Takes a lot of skill to pull that off. So, he wasn't... the degree of difficulty was much higher using the bow. So, of course, everyone was in an uproar about this. The New York Post notes hunting black bears is legal in Alaska, provided all state hunting regulations are followed. But while Wentz had legal right to take down the bear, the morality of his action was debatable. Okay. Judging by the social media response, users found both killing the bear and posing next to it in poor taste. Here's someone who said, "Such an incredible animal. You had to slaughter it with a high-powered weapon." You wouldn't want to try to take him down with a low-powered weapon, okay? Anyway, I believed in an afterlife that would treat you with the compassion you've earned in this life, you vile life form. Okay, so outrage. He's called a vile life form. Well, how do we think about this, right? Is it wrong? Are these animals innocent? This is going to come up later on in this broadcast, but let me just remind you that the people who are outraged at Carson Wentz about hunting and taking down this huge bear, these are the same people who demand abortion, right? For convenience, right? They are eugenicists. They have no regard for human life. They're the same ones who advocate, they demand abortion for convenience. And today, now, assisted suicide or euthanasia. Those things are good. Taking down a black bear in Alaska, well, that's evil, according to these folks. Person says, "I wish I believed in an afterlife that would treat you with the compassion Well, you're in for quite a surprise." Another person said, "Only a cowardly man still practices this barbarity." These are the people who, calling them defenseless animals, calling it barbaric. These people have no idea. These are the same people that will affirm the theory of evolution, right? And And at the same time, they're here outraged about this. In their other tweets, they're advocating for abortion, assisted suicide. Many from the non-Christian animal rights side will claim that hunting an animal of any kind, or hunting of any kind, is unethical and immoral. And they will disregard the Bible as insufficient or irrelevant on the matter. But they have no standard at all by which to make this truth claim. They're just upset. But they've got no argument. This is just emotion. It's not an argument. All they have is opinions about what feels right with no authority to which they can appeal. So they have no argument. So there's that. I thought you might find that interesting. But then there's this group here called Colossal. Now these are all links and stories that the lovely Summer has found over the past few weeks, and I'm just getting around now to finally being able to look at them and respond. And this is really good stuff. This one is called Colossal. This is a company. It says the science of genetics, the business of discovery. So we're blending genetics with business, of course. So this is what they really do is they are using the CRISPR technology. One of their goals, it says, is to fix extinction. Right? They want to de-extinct animals. And currently they're working very hard to bring back the woolly mammoth. Combining the science of genetics with the business of discovery, we endeavor to jumpstart nature's ancestral heartbeat, to see the woolly mammoth thunder across tundra once again, to advance the economies of biology and healing through genetics, to make humanity more human. Sounds like Rob Zombie, doesn't it? To make humanity more human than human. And to reawaken the lost wilds of Earth so we and our planet can breathe easier. Okay, so this is all about the planet, apparently. So, let's see. It says here that we're evolving for the sake of tomorrow. So they're trying to bring back extinct species, and I'm telling you, they're not going to succeed. Let's just get that out in the open right now. They're not going to succeed at this, but you have to ask: is this smart? Is this a good idea? Glenn Beck had the CEO, what's his name? Ben Lamb. He had him on his show a few weeks ago. And yeah, there are definitely some ethical problems here. But do you want... Look, Carson Wentz just took down this black bear, right? But imagine if we had Tyrannosaurus Rex back. Imagine if we had those velociraptors back. Right. We might not be the apex predator anymore. Well, that would be just fine with all these people who are outraged with Carson Wentz. But look, folks, the problem is not with society. So let's think about the Tower of Babel for just a minute. Babel. We'll say it probably. Tower of Babel. The problem is not with society. And just as the Babylonites did when they built the city and tower complex on the plains of Shinar, at the end of the Bible, God himself creates, it's not that there's a problem with cities. God is going to create a new city for his people to live in the new earth. It's going to be a huge metropolis, streets of gold. It's going to be something. But the problem's not with society or cities or any technology. The problem is with the hearts of the people who are building this particular society and this particular tower at this particular time. God's not against this technology. He's against sin and the proposed tower is the headquarters of autonomous human sinfulness. Now, we'll be talking about this with you more soon. This concept of the Tower of Babel and how today, with the United Nations and the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum and CERN and all of these things, they're all concentrated in one part of Europe, and it's all right around Geneva, Switzerland. So you see, originally the tower was an effort to get above the flood. Now God had already said he would not flood the earth again. That was a covenant with the rainbow. Will not flood the earth again. And so these people didn't care, didn't listen. They knew that God had said that. The Tower of Babel was built just within a couple generations of the flood. So that's a short enough period. They were aware of God's covenant, but they either didn't trust God, didn't believe God, or something, because they decided that they were going to get above the next flood with this tower. The tower wasn't really supposed to take them to heaven, but it was supposed to knock God off of his throne, in that they were going to outsmart God. Right? That's what we see happening today. And so we see this with the Tower of Babel, and then it hasn't stopped, folks. It's the same message. It's the same group of people doing the same thing over and over. As you can see on the Great Seal of the United States of America, on the reverse side of it anyway. It wasn't originally part of the seal, but when they added a reverse side later on, this is what they added. No one's really surprised, are you? And you can see there that it is, once again, a type of tower. Now, the point here is, folks, that the Tower of Babel was not a tower, a cylindrical tower. It was most likely a ziggurat, which is a type of pyramid. Looks like a step pyramid. And in fact, where the site is, where it's believed to have been, you find ruins of a ziggurat. So it would have looked like a pyramid. And so it's just interesting to see that throughout history from that time, some of the symbolism of mankind making his efforts to grow and expand and take dominion autonomously. You can see the symbol is this. It's this tower. It's this, in 4,000 years ago, a tower would have been a pyramid. So you can see the symbolism. Now, also, if we've got here the European Parliament building in Strasbourg, France, no question about it, folks. There's no question that building was the architects, what they had in mind here. So what we're talking about here today also is this idea of what do Christians do? Are we supposed to do anything? Are we supposed to not respond? Is it right to stand up to thwart an incipient empire that's bent on world domination? Should we? Is that what we're here to do? Well, we're going to share some Nazi information here in just a moment. And that brings to mind a gentleman by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a Christian minister living at that time. And he thought it was appropriate to respond when he participated in the plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. And God seems to think so too here at the Tower of Babel, when he prevents the tower, the city and tower project from progressing. But note that even here God's response. See, mankind in rebellion does something in rebellion, and then God responds. And here, how has God responded? It wasn't to slaughter the rebels, but he just confused the languages, right? Giving them time to repent as he disperses them all over the face of the earth, which is what God had intended in the first place. So you can see this is really a story about God's sovereignty. It's not about God getting confused and mankind getting one over on God. That's not what happened here. We do evil, and in his sovereignty and his providence, the things that we do intending evil always work out for the good of God's people. So he could have slaughtered them, but all he did was confuse the languages. And the people dispersed all over the earth, just as God had originally commanded in the first place. So the people who were unwilling to obey God's command to fill the earth were now forced to do it. So the place where they built the tower to make a name for themselves, from that point on, was given the name, the Hebrew word for confusion. And it's all connected, the word babbling on, it's all connected. The word is the root of the Hebrew word for Babylon, which is a repeated symbol in the Bible for human society that sets itself up in autonomous opposition to God, making a name for itself rather than recognizing its maker. That's exactly what we see here today. We see in the book of Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar encapsulates the spirit of Babel with his boast. Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty? That's Daniel 4:30. And we all know what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He spent at least 7 years crawling around on his hands and knees in a field like an animal. He went insane. God allowed it. And then he came back to his throne later. But we'll get into that later. What the Babel motif demonstrates is that the logical end of this dynamic that we're talking about, that we're seeing here in our world, as well as the condition of its success, right? It's the storming of heaven, and if such a thing were possible, the killing of God to clear a way for man to conquer, for man to be the master of all things. So that's I think it's an apt metaphor for what we see happening today. We have access to more information than any generation to ever live on the earth. And this expansion is moving fast. Our parents, born somewhere between 1900 and 1950, experienced the emergence and very quick growth of radio, television as a medium for broadcasting information to a wide audience. So in a little over 100 years, the people of Earth have experienced a greater change in how we perceive the world than perhaps ever before. Those of us born in the last 50 years of the 20th century, before the cell phone, before the beeper, we've lived through and participated in and been greatly shaped by the influence of the information age. So we've seen and experienced a time of an exponential leap in the amount of information resources available to every person. And the children of our generation will have exponentially more, in the sense that information is a prerequisite to knowledge. This is a good thing. But what we see happening, especially from when we look at these international health regulations, the amendments to them, and we listen to Antonio Gutierrez, like at the top of the show from that our common agenda, we hear knowledge being proclaimed. But knowledge is empty without understanding. So I want to speak now to all of you, myself included. This is an important message. We don't have to know everything about something in order to understand it, right? Yeah, it is true that it's a good thing to uncover what the evil rulers are doing. That's right. But we don't have to know everything about them in order to understand it. Too many facts are often as much of an obstacle to understanding as too few. It's quite true that as modern people, as we sit here today with all the resources we have available, we have accepted facts and the theories of others to the detriment of our own understanding. And this has become a big problem for us. This is why when people send in messages or leave comments, or you can see it on other YouTube videos, people are asking, how do we wake people up? What do we do? What do we do? Well, we need understanding. Like these information resources, for the most part, this inundation, this amount of information that we have today, these resources are designed to make thinking seem unnecessary, right? You can find information about almost anything you want just like that, just very quickly, especially now with ChatGPT and artificial intelligence being made available to everyone. You've got information about, it's not unlimited, but it sure does seem like it is. Today, information comes to us in packages of intellectual positions and views. Right? You go to a YouTube channel and you listen to your favorite YouTuber, and you're going to get a package of information about something. That is one of the most active enterprises of some of the most brilliant and also some of the most devious minds of our time today, is that packaging of information to market to you. From television, radio, magazines, newspapers, and now the dominant force of the internet, the modern person is presented with a profuse complex of elements, from truly brilliant rhetoric to carefully selected and very specific data points and statistics, to a deluge of headlines and opinions and influencers that are making it very easy for you to make up your mind, right? With very little effort involved, right? You hear a lot of people say today, I've done my research on this. I've done my research on that. What they really mean most of the time is they watch someone's YouTube video and they use that person's opinion as their own. Right? It's very easy for us to make up our mind today. You'd think that we'd have the brightest, most well-informed population ever. But since people generally seek out sources that share the same views, and the packaging of the information is done so effectively to make you choose it, that the consumer usually takes these information packages and opinions into his mind, kind of like inserting a cassette tape into your brain. And then whenever you're challenged on your views, or whenever you see fit, whenever you think it's appropriate, you just push that playback button and you repeat that information package that you plugged in earlier from YouTube or wherever. And in our society, when someone does that, when they just repeat what they heard someone else say, he seems to have performed acceptably, and he didn't even have to think to do it. Today, it's possible to fool many people into thinking that you actually know what you're talking about on all kinds of subjects. Just memorize some information. This is a hollow form of educating oneself, and it's become so normalized that you can even fool yourself into believing that you really know what's happening in the world. Let me tell you a secret. You don't. You don't know what's happening in the world. We like to think we know what's happening here and there. You don't know. You don't know what's happening in the world. You have an idea. You have a sense of what's going on, but you don't really know. Not in the sense of think of God in his omniscience, omnipresence, in his sovereignty, in his providence. You don't have that. Anyone can become knowledgeable about a subject by collecting data and opinions and researching and memorizing facts, but what we need to strive for is understanding. While having access to so much information is good, and information definitely should not be censored in the way the globalist dictator class wants to do it, we don't need less information. We need more wisdom. Knowledge is defined as being acquainted with the facts or truths or principles, as from a study or doing an investigation. Knowledge is typically gained through books, research, delving into facts. In the Bible, to know also carries the most intimate connotation. I'm sure you know. As in carnal knowledge. So knowing, gathering data, what does it mean? What is wisdom? Wisdom means having the power of discernment and judging properly about what is true or false or right or wrong. Wisdom implies that you've got discretion. In other words, knowledge is kind of like a pallet of bricks delivered to your driveway. Wisdom is knowing how to build a house with those bricks. To have wisdom is to have a perspective. To be able to make sound judgments, and which come from that comes from experience. It's something that's acquired over time. For example, you might be very knowledgeable about people. You might have spent a lot of time around people. You might be aware of trends and attitudes. You might watch a lot of TV or YouTube videos. You might even read books. You might talk to other people, friends or family members. But when it comes time to interact, when it comes time to actually be in a relationship with another human being, there's far more required from you than a pallet of bricks. You need much more than a collection of data. You need care. And care comes from judgment and discernment. It comes out of wisdom. To put it another way, there's a fruit salad philosophy. Knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in the fruit salad, if that helps. Wisdom is the application of knowledge with discernment based on evaluation of experience and the moral law that's written on everyone's heart. Wisdom requires great understanding, apprehension of that data, and the ability to determine which facts and opinions are relevant in certain situations and which are not. It's knowing how to use your knowledge, applying proper perspective. And then, perhaps most importantly, wisdom is knowing how to impart that knowledge to others, how to teach others from your knowledge base. So knowledge is knowing what to say, wisdom is knowing when to shut up. So we give way too much attention to popular disseminators of information, influencers. And we don't pay nearly enough attention to wise people. Job 12:12 says, "Is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding?" Here's Proverbs 16:31. Sorry about that running off the side there. Let's try it over. We'll try it right there. We go. Well, Proverbs 16:31 says, "Gray hair is a crown of glory, and it is gained in a righteous life." Gray hair is a crown of glory. What is that saying? Right? The Bible is telling us that with age, with experience, that's how we get wisdom. The book of Proverbs begins with this essential lesson. Proverbs 1. Actually, the first 10 chapters in Proverbs is that's what it's about. It's about gaining wisdom, how important wisdom is, and what we mean when we say wisdom. Book of Proverbs says, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing and righteousness, justice and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And then Proverbs 11:2 says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace. When pride comes, then comes disgrace. So there's a sense here, and the Bible is telling us that there's something morally good about wisdom, about a proper use of knowledge, and that there's something dark or evil about an improper use of wisdom or improper use of information and knowledge. Proverbs 16:16 says, how much better to get wisdom than gold. To get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. To get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. The highway of the upright turns aside from evil. Whoever guards his way preserves his life. And then verse 18, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before fall. So you see, there's definitely a moral element there to what we do with information. Now, the context here is God's word, right? But that certainly applies for the Christian. It applies to all things. Proverbs 1 even goes on to instruct here as on what to do when you're enticed by the world and sinners. It says, hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. It's valuable. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. How about that? Do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods, and we shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us, and we'll all have one purse. We'll share our ill-gotten gain. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird. But these men lie in wait for their own blood. So the message here is, these people who think they're getting over on the world, like the Babylonites, think they're getting one over on God. No, they're sealing their own fate. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. So, it's very important to make sure that we treat our information rightly. Verse 20 says, wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the market she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy street she cries out. At the entrance of the city gate she speaks. So it's there. It's there for you. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? I just thought that was very interesting. So we've got, now that we've got that laid down there about information and how to think about this stuff, let's look at Yuval Harari. But before we do that, let me remind you folks, please, if you would, download the Armor of Truth mobile app. It's free. It'll always be free. And you can get, let's see. Yeah, there we go. By the way, you'll get notifications of when we do live shows, which you're just going to get one right now because I just sent out the Subsplash notification. You'll get a notification when we go live, wherever we happen to be when we go live, whatever platform we might be on. There's a James Bible study going on right now on the app. Myself and Summer are going to be having our Tracking Dystopia podcast there. There's one episode up and available for you there now. That's where we're going to be able to talk about things that we can't say here. The Tracking Dystopia podcast on the Armor of Truth mobile app. Download that, folks. It'll be a great help to us if you'll download it. And if you can support us, please do so. There's links in the description to help you do that. Also on the app, there's just one button. Tap it, and you can give that way.
It would take humanity to new heights to create a new world order.
And apologies for the late notification, but it's out there now.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
Okay. So let's talk about Yuval Noah Harari. First of all, let's listen to what he says here on a couple things. You're going to find this interesting today.
I mean, most Christians would agree that Hinduism...
Oh, yeah, let me get this fixed here. There we go.
Islam and so forth, they are just fictional stories invented by people. So it's not just atheists and secular people who say it. The only difference is that religious people make an exception for their own religion, which they insist is not a story invented by humans, it's the truth.
That's what Bitcoiners do.
Right, so, so Harari is saying here, he's saying that, look at what all these religious people do. They all think they have the truth. The Christians think they have the truth, and certainly the Christians think that the Buddhists and the Muslims and the whoever are all wrong, right? Well, let me tell you this. If you have you do, everyone does have a worldview, but if you hold a worldview and you don't think it's true, well, that's insanity. No one's going to hold a worldview that they know is false, right? So it's just reasonable that people would believe that their perspective is correct. So I don't know what all Harari is doing here is he's just trying to spit on religion. What Harari doesn't realize is that he's very religious himself, and I'll show you exactly how that is as we move forward here. He is involved in something called Vipassana meditation. This is very interesting because in fact, what it is, it's sort of a, Harari has a Jewish heritage, but this Vipassana it's very much Kabbalistic, right? When you look up in the Kabbalah dictionary, you'll find Vipassana, and the idea is it's sort of a mixture of Kabbalah and Buddhism. Buddhism is not. They say when you ask someone who's a Buddhist, it's not a religion; it's a philosophy. Well, it's obviously religious, right? It's the worldview. But this is kind of like that. This is kind of like a Kabbalistic Buddhism, the practice of intense silence for extended periods of time that leads to altered states of consciousness, right? That's what he says here in this video.
You are somebody who practices Vipassana. Does that help you get closer to the Force? Is that where you get closer to?
Closer to the Force. The Force, Luke. Use the Force. Okay.
The Force.
I practice Vipassana meditation to see reality more clearly.
Okay.
to be able to see what is reality, what is really.
That's in that interesting, folks. He says he practices vipassana meditation to see reality more clearly. And he can't see. He can't see. It is the most obvious thing in the world that since there is a creation here, that there's a creator. The universe cannot be eternal. It has to have a beginning, and this universe can't have a beginning without a mind to begin it. Right? It was volitional. And so Romans 1 tells us this, that these people who suppress the truth and unrighteousness. So we have to assume from what God's word tells us that he knows better than what he's saying, but this is what he's adopted, right, as he suppresses the truth and unrighteousness.
Happening right here, right now. I'm not doing it as any kind of religious exercise to get in touch with this force or that force, with this story or that story. It's really, for me, then, the least dogmatic thing I ever encountered in life is vipassana meditation. It just tells you, just observe what is really happening right now as it is, without trying to impose any story on it, without trying to change it in any way. I mean, I remember the first time I went to a course, and the first instruction I got from the teacher was observe your breath. Not observe God, not observe the soul, just observe your breath coming in and out of your nostrils, and just accept the breath, whatever it is. If it is strong, if it's weak, if it comes from this nostril or that nostril, it doesn't matter. Just observe the reality as it is. And what amazed me...
No, I'm not gonna, we can just stop right there. And there's nothing wrong with relaxing, with breathing and relaxing. There's nothing wrong with that. But he's talking about specifically something called mindfulness, or this is transcendental meditation. Now, in Harari's book, Homo Deus, the man God, right in the beginning, he dedicates the book. He says, "To my teacher, S.N. Goenka, who lovingly taught me important things." Who is S.N. Goenka? Because Harari says that's my teacher. That's his mentor. This is Satya Narayana, is that right? Narayan Goenka. This gentleman here. The foremost teacher of Vipassana meditation, which is non-sectarian Buddhism. That's what it is. It's known as Dhamma. That's D-H-A-M-M-A, Dhamma, which is the way to liberation. It centers on, it has centers on we'll just say all 6 continents. And, won't count Antarctica there. They may have a center there. We don't know about that one yet. But at the 2000 Millennium World Peace Summit at the United Nations, Goenka spoke there. And it was the first ever gathering of religious and spiritual leaders at the United Nations. His speech focused on religious harmony, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence, as long as you do it our way. He said, quote, "We should try to convert people from misery to happiness, from bondage to liberation, and from cruelty to compassion." All those things sound right, don't they? But how are you going to do it? By meditation. By clearing and emptying yourself, you're going to change the world. How so? There cannot be, he says, quote, "There cannot be peace in the world when people have anger and hatred in their hearts." That's very true. That's a biblical concept. He's borrowing from the Bible there. That's true. We're fallen. And there won't be peace in the world, right, until the kingdom is realized. He says, only with love and compassion in the heart is world peace attainable. And the quote that I had highlighted says, "One who has love and compassion with a pure heart experiences the kingdom of heaven within. This is the law of nature, or if you rather, God's will. And it said in the article there that to that it was thunderous applause was received for Goenka. Well, Harari talks about humans upgrading themselves into gods and all of this. So at the same time, he poo-poos religion, but he is very religious himself. He has his own religion. So if you hear him say these things, or you hear any of these atheists or any of these eminent moralists out there say these, just understand they're very religious. It's like Paul when he went into Athens and walked around through the city and saw all the idols, and he told them, you seem to be very religious. You're off. You don't have anything that's real here, but you are very religious. So this is mindfulness, typical concept of meditation here in the West. Comes from the Buddhist concept, but of mindfulness. But the goal is to attain a state where one is simply aware of the moment without any regard for the past or the future, like a state of consciousness where you just accept what currently is without deciding what is good or bad or preferring what is pleasurable over what is painful. Right? That's what's known as the state of meditation. And you're supposed to carry that over into your, we'll call it your waking life. So meditation is not consciously or willfully reflecting on any higher truth or concept in order to better understand it. And aside from relaxation, right? Nothing wrong with relaxation, but this is transcendentalism, right? This is something else. The goal of this is not to meditate on anything at all. In other words, whatever passes through your mind during this state, you're not to think of it as good or bad. It's just to be allowed and experienced without judgment, without continuing down any one train of thought. Even the Mayo Clinic defines meditation as is where you broaden your consciousness and awareness. You focus on what you experience during the meditation, such as the flow of your breath. You can observe your thoughts and emotions, but let them pass without judgment. How can anybody do such a thing? Why would you want to? What if you have a terrible thought? Well, anyway, the biblical perspective on all this, like judging your thoughts, a Christian worldview encourages rest, right? Relaxation for the body, respite for the mind, especially in this age, right? It's just constant bombardment with information. And we get fatigued. I feel it. I know we all feel it. But the idea of pursuing a state where we just let our thoughts run free without any judgment of what is good or bad, well, that's definitely not a Christian solution. That's coming from somewhere else. And there is no neutrality in this world. So if it's not from God, and it's not from anywhere good. Scripture commands us to take every thought captive, 2 Corinthians 10:5. To the obedience, right? To take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. Colossians 3:2, set your minds on the things that are above, not on the things that are on earth, like yourself. And in Philippians 4, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence and if anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So Scripture wants us to meditate on something. It's called active meditation. That's what the Bible means when you see the word there. It means to take a thought, a passage of Scripture, or something of God's will, and to think about it. When you see the word meditate in the New Testament, it has the connotation of chewing, as like a cow chews its cud. So it means to just to chew on it, literally to chew on it. Not to let it pass without judgment, to empty yourself, to make yourself an empty vessel for whatever might be nearby. Meditation practices that involve detached states of consciousness, devoid of moral judgment or discernment over our own thoughts, are thoroughly unbiblical. They're from the wrong place. and the Christian should avoid them. So this gives us an idea of where Harari is coming from, right? As Christians, we always must make a careful distinction between thoughts that are good and thoughts that are not good. And we're to set our minds on that which is good while rejecting that which is not. The popular concept of meditation forbids someone from making that distinction. Therefore, Harari has a religion. Whose religion is it? That's plain to see. Okay, now. There's the Vipassana website. Not much here. Don't need to spend any time here. But just to show you, S.N. Goenka, he's been around for a good while teaching this. But Harari's kind of, put the spotlight on him. Psalm 19:14 says, "May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, Lord, my rock and my redeemer." That's Psalm 19:14. And in Psalm 119, "How I love your law. It is my meditation all the day. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies. They are ever mine. I have more insight than all my teachers, for your testimonies are my meditation." Means that God's word, God's law, which means his word, it consumes my thoughts. It says, "I understand more than those who are old because I have complied with your precepts." So there's a sense there that God's word is telling us that to gain wisdom, even beyond your years, it can be done through the word. This is wisdom. This is understanding, right? 1 Peter 1:13, "Therefore prepare your minds for action. Keep sober in spirit. Set your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." So that's not what we see when we listen to Harari. And plainly, he gives religion a hard time, but he's got one. He is a very religious man. And so I showed you the dedication there in Homo Deus. And there's just, in 21 lessons for the 21st century, more interesting comments. He says, "The cosmic mystery doesn't help us at all in maintaining the social order. People often argue that we must believe in a God that gave some very concrete laws to humans, or else morality will disappear and society will collapse into primeval chaos." That's just a fact. That's just the truth. He says sometimes it has had positive consequences. The very same religions that inspire hate and bigotry in some people inspire love and compassion in others. Look, the Bible tells us the only reason there's any love and any compassion in the world today because of God's common grace. And he goes on to talk a little bit about homosexuality and stuff like that. He says morality doesn't mean following divine commands. It means reducing suffering. So you see right there in his writing, his religion comes forth in his writing. Don't get it twisted. Don't let anybody fool you. Yuval Harari is a religious man. He has a religion and he's proclaiming it widely. He says you just need to develop deep appreciation of suffering. Is that not the polar opposite of Scripture? If you really understand how an action causes unnecessary suffering to yourself or to others, you will naturally abstain from it. That's not true. That is not true. Human beings don't stop. They don't stop doing something pleasurable if someone else suffers from it. I'm not saying universally. But look around you. Look around you. Human beings obviously don't mind a certain level of suffering. They're okay with it. That's that thread, that thin line between good and evil that runs through all of us. That is the knowledge of good and evil. That is That is what we lost. That's what was lost in the garden. It was that connection with God. They are fixated on satisfying their immediate lust or greed without concern for the impact on others or even for the long-term impact on themselves. Because people nevertheless do engage in suffering and causing suffering, no matter how much meditation you do. Right, so just quickly, to help you a little bit understand a little bit more about what it is that Harari's got here, it's something called immanent moralism. It's where you reject supernatural things in favor of moralistic codes. He's definitely a mystic, right? But he's a mystic only in the sense that he goes in and tries to transcend himself or his thoughts. But so it's kind of like Confucianism, right? Confucianism is a moral code. So what's the problem? How do we do apologetics with this, right? If any regular man is ever appealed to as the authority, and of course, Harari says that Goenka is his authority. So if any man is pointed to, other than the God-man, Jesus Christ, well then we're reduced to relativism, since epistemological authority cannot be justified due to the finite nature of our minds. Why should I listen to Confucius? Why should I listen to S.N. Goenka? Why should I listen to any person? Who is he that I should pay attention to him? He's just a man who only held a job for 7 years, got fired, and then became a teacher. That's Confucius. So when we go to tear these arguments down, right, we just ask questions. Is it arbitrary? Is the system that's being promoted by Harari in this case, is it arbitrary? That means, is it constantly open to interpretation, right? And it is. Jesus is the Son of the living God, and he will be the judge of the whole world. He not only is infinite and possesses exhaustive knowledge, but he also is the one who created the moral law, right? The standard. That knowledge of good and evil that runs through every person. And he created it based on his own nature. And he is the one with the authority to hold us all accountable to that standard. So you see, in that sense, Christianity is perfectly consistent. How could anyone know authoritatively who the wisest was unless there was already in existence an objective standard of truth and morals that transcended humanity? Right? Yuval Harari sits on the stage and makes truth claims, and he makes moral observations. Why? Why is what you're saying good? What standard? There is none. They cannot justify their positions. So, climate change for babies is, we get that in a world like this. Okay, I want to move quickly through these. Here's Harari. And just listen to the first couple minutes of this interview. It's really interesting. Listen to this.
New things.
Now let's rewind.
Even if you think in terms of
I've heard you say that the idea that knowledge is power is somewhat obsolete now because information is unlimited. Tell me about that, because it does seem like this landscape has made...
All right, now remember what we're talking about here today. We're talking about the difference between knowledge, or the difference between information and knowledge and wisdom. Right? Wisdom is knowing how to use all of that information.
Be changed a little bit from 1,000 years ago, where information was rare.
Yeah, I mean, for most of history, information was rare. I mean, the main job of the education system was just to provide people with, the basics, with the basic information about the world. And censorship worked by blocking information. Now it's the other way around. We are flooded by enormous amounts of information that we cannot handle. The main job of the education system is not to provide information. We don't need more information. We need the ability to sift through the information, to tell the difference between...
Okay, so, what he's saying here, it's correct in a sense. But he's going to get right around to his point right now. He's going to tell you that we really got to control what people see.
Reliable and unreliable information. This is what we need from education. And censorship also, it works by flooding us with even more information so we don't know what to pay attention to.
Do you know what to pay attention to? Well, if you don't, Yuval Harari is eager to tell you what you should pay attention to.
Basically, it's a bit like what happens with food. We really need to go on an information diet. For most of history, food...
So that's just a clever way of saying we need to censor the internet. We need to censor this information. We need to be careful about what people can see.
It was scarce, so you ate whatever you got. Now, even poor people in many countries, they actually suffer from too much food. And what you need is to be very careful about which kind of food you put into your body. It's the same with information. We need an information diet to be very, very careful what kinds of information we are feeding our minds, because very often we feed our minds junk food.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
He goes on in there. This guy interviewing him is he's just there to cheer Harari on.
But I mean, it's more people on. Well, that
fictions and fantasies are also information. Most information in the world is not about the truth. It's not about anything. It doesn't represent anything. It builds new things. So, even if you think in biological terms, even if you think about the most basic type of information on the planet for living organisms, which is DNA, DNA doesn't represent anything. DNA builds new things.
So there's an interesting claim. I thought I heard that the other day, and I thought, wow, that DNA doesn't represent anything. What? The fact that it exists is miraculous, especially if you're an evolutionary naturalist, you're Darwinian, like Harari is. How could DNA is like a library? It's amazing, and I don't know how anyone could make it doesn't represent anything. It builds things. It represents the fact that there is a creator. It's information. Information does not come any other way but from a mind. And if so it's logically impossible for something to create itself. So the universe couldn't create itself. Man can't create himself. So when we see DNA, that library of information, we know someone wrote it. Someone created that. That is not something that evolves. Irreducible complexity is what they call it. It's like the eyeball is an organ that could not have evolved. It had to show up fully functional on the first go. The eyeball doesn't evolve. So there. So let's see. We got just a couple seconds here at 36 minutes. Mark, he's going to talk a little bit about genetics, which was going to be the main focus today, but I've gone on pretty long about information.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? What's happening with society in 200 years?
Yeah, well, again, it's more about technology than about society. Mm-hmm. The combination of biotechnology on one side and artificial intelligence on the other side means that if we don't destroy ourselves in the next century or two, we are very, very likely to use these technologies to either change ourselves, our own bodies and brains and minds, to such an extent that, again, we are more different, or these future entities will be more different from us than we are different from Neanderthals. You know, the only difference between us and Neanderthals is just a few genetic mutations.
It's the only thing that separates us from. First of all, folks, you got to understand. There's just that's what's called the missing link. There is no link between us and any subhuman being. It doesn't exist. Don't buy into it. It doesn't exist, but it's assumed, right? It's assumed orthodoxy. So he's talking here about he's saying that if you can think of how far advanced we are from Neanderthals, or he used chimpanzees at one time. That's how far removed our future selves will be from how we are now. That's how far we will advance. So that's a prophecy, right? He makes prophecies, he pontificates about these things. But listen to this. This is the one we wanted to focus in on here.
In the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, what humanity basically learned to produce was all kinds of stuff, like textiles and shoes and weapons and vehicles. And this was enough for very few countries that underwent the revolution fast enough to subjugate everybody else. What we're talking about now is like a second industrial revolution, but the product this time will not be textiles or machines or vehicles or even weapons. The product this time will be humans themselves. We are basically learning to produce bodies and minds. Bodies and minds are going to be, I think, the two main products of the next wave of all these changes. And if there is a gap between those that know to produce bodies and minds and those that do not, then this is far greater than anything we saw before in history. And this time, if you're not part of the revolution fast enough, then you probably become extinct. Once you know how to produce bodies and brains and minds, so cheap labor in Africa or South Asia or wherever.
So that means that anyone who is not down with transhumanism is going to go extinct. That's basically what he's saying. If you don't want to be a part of the revolution, you're going to go extinct. Now, Harari is not a scientist. He's not even a philosopher. He's a historian. So it's amazing to me why he gets so much attention from that sect. I think that maybe he's just been promoted and put out there as this character. But listen to what he says right here. This is what's really shocking.
It simply counts for nothing. Again, I think that the biggest question maybe in economics and politics of the coming decades will be what to do with all these useless people. I don't think we have an economic model for that. My best guess, which is just a guess, is that...
In case you didn't hear what he said there, he said, what are we going to do with all the useless people? I'll rewind it for you.
Maybe in economics and politics of the coming decades will be what to do with all these useless people. I don't think we have an economic model for that. My best guess, which is just a guess, is that food will not be a problem with that kind of technology.
Let's stop it there. What he says is the problem will be boredom, right? It'll be like we don't have like the people who aren't part of the new whatever, this new age, this new world that they're building, or just people in general are going to be so bored because everything is going to be done for them. What are we going to do with all of these useless people? Useless people. This gives you an idea of the mindset we're dealing with here, right? Yuval Harari flaunts the concept of the new global useless class, which artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, automation, and the fourth industrial revolution is supposed to create. Davos man himself, Klaus Schwab, openly calls for all the masses to be microchipped so that we can all be interfaced with or perpetually connected to a global network that monitors not so much what you do, that's easy to know. What they want is to know what you think so they can control it. They want to know how you feel so they can control that. They want to know what's going on inside your body so they can control that. Right? Remember, full spectrum dominance from the cellular level out to the level of the planet itself. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg out there promoting Neuralink, an actual physical interface with the brain for the purpose of, as they say, to keep humanity relevant, right? By merging man with the technology. They believe this is the thing to do because they believe that mankind must facilitate his own biological evolution. So, what do you say to that? I mean, we have history to show us where this kind of thing leads. Of course, within all of this is the worldview, the haunting specter of evolutionary naturalism or Darwinian evolution. It has so twisted the minds of the godless element of modern science to the point where geneticists like Sir James Watson or Richard Dawkins and people like Peter Singer and Bill Gates and others, today they are openly defending, promoting, and defending eugenics. They're happy to do it. In the early 20th century, eugenics was widely supported among the educated classes all across the Western countries. Eugenicists saw themselves as the saviors of the human race, using the most cutting-edge science to eradicate human suffering. Do you see the connection? Harari's talking about his Vipassana meditation, his form of his atheism and his Buddhism, his religion. Right? It's about observing suffering. The most cutting-edge science to eradicate human suffering and to improve humanity by encouraging the reproduction of only the fittest members of the human race and discouraging the reproduction of the unfit. Eugenicists believed and still believe today they could rapidly create a race of strong, healthy, super intelligent human beings. No longer would the state and society be burdened with the mentally disabled and those who drain the resources of society with their weaknesses and diseases. For example, Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger. Remind you folks, we've got an article on Substack. There's another article up on Substack, which is also available on the Armor of Truth mobile app. You can on the home page, you click articles, and you can find all our written pieces there. And that's what this article is about, how Christians should engage. And that's the theme, the underlying theme of what we're talking about here today. How do we parse through this information? How do we get to wisdom? So check out this article on the Armor of Truth mobile app. So Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger used her term for these people who are unfit was moral degenerates, right? All those people who said Carson Wentz for shooting the bear was, he was a moral degenerate. This is what they believe. Sanger is the heroine of these people. She's the heroine of the screeching abortion activists who today, she was, anyways, an enthusiastic proponent of eugenics. So by extension, the pro-choice movement is, and Planned Parenthood, and most of the progressive left are pro-eugenics today. Sanger openly advocated for the forcible sterilization of the unfit and the involuntary collection of such people into internment camps where they would spend their entire lives in forced labor. She claimed that these methods were necessary for the sake of peace, right? Or in contemporary vernacular, national security. These ideas were carried in various Western countries, including the United States. In the U.S., tens of thousands of people were deemed unfit and forcibly sterilized. Right? We also had the Tuskegee experiment. But the movement received a black eye, at least a little bit, when the Nazis took these principles to their inevitable logical conclusion. So look, there is in a sense where you can respect the Nazis because at least they were consistent to their worldview. Right? They took it all the way to the conclusion. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that, well, at least they're consistent, because the people around us screeching it, they're not consistent at all. They were consistent right up to the final solution. They didn't only target Jews either. This regime, in the name of national security, exterminated anyone that was deemed mentally handicapped, homosexuals, or any group that was determined to be a drain on society or to be out of step with their rational society. Friedrich Nietzsche was a major influence on many leaders in science and politics today, and he was a great influence on Hitler and the Nazi movement. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power emphasized the driving force behind human behavior in the pursuit of dominance. Some proponents of eugenics say that interpret this concept to suggest that society should promote the breeding of individuals with desirable traits to enhance the power and vitality of the human race. Nietzsche discussed a distinction between master morality and slave morality. That saw the strong, dominant individuals associated with master morality as superior. I think this is also called biological heroism. Right? Their qualities should be preserved, right? Propagated through the selective breeding, where his concept of the Ubermensch or the Overman or the Superman could be realized. They're still doing it. It hasn't gone anywhere. A higher form, basically it's what you hear Harari proclaiming is a higher form of human being who transcends traditional moral and societal constraints, right? The ultimate utilitarian, the ultimate pragmatist, right? Nietzsche criticized traditional morality and called ideas like altruism, pity, and charity herd instincts. The movement then and now is seeking to establish a new set of values. And that is the values of transhumanism. All right, so there's a whole section on this where I get into eugenics and the abortion industry and how what was happening in the Nazi regime is happening right now, only it's hidden behind walls and sterile clinics. It's hidden under the perceived reputation of a white coat. Right? It's all sterilized now. Right? Right? People say, well, we don't burn people anymore, do we? Well, are you sure about that? You know, when we look at you saw Dave Rubin up there. I was going to play a selection. I've got a video here from Dave Rubin where he's describing how he and his so-called husband were going to have two babies. They're going to have two daughters, or two, I don't know if the sex, but two kids. They were going to have two kids. So they had one egg donor, two surrogate mothers, and then both of the guys would donate their own sperm. So, but the idea here is, okay, in Dave's case, in his story, he said 19 eggs were harvested. So you have to harvest these eggs, and all of them get, attempt to fertilize them. So let's assume they get 50%. They get better than that, but let's assume they get 50% success on that. And out of the ladies, it's usually somewhere between 8 and 15 eggs. I think in Rubin's case, the woman whose eggs were harvested, I think they got 19 or 20 eggs. So let's just say half of those took, and you've got 10 fertilized eggs or embryos. That's life. That is life. Right? If it's life at 3 months, if it's a baby at 3 months, it's a baby at the embryo stage. There's no point at which now it's real. All right. And so these embryos, what happens? They only kept 2. What happens to the other 8? Well, I've done some research on that, and I'll share that with you sometime soon. Suffice to say, they are still burning human life, right? They incinerate these things. These embryos, these human beings. So we'll share that with you next time. But what I want to leave you with now, before we get out of here now, is just a little message on, like, what do Christians do? What should we do? That's the title today. Should Christians stop the global dictator class? The secular person says separation of church and state. Well, yeah, but there's no separation of God and state, right? Should Christians bring their religion into decisions that affect everyone, like government and legislation? We've already talked about that. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he certainly thought so. God certainly thinks so. So many modern Christians say Jesus didn't engage in politics. We're in the world, not of the world. So how do we think about it? How do we respond? Dr. James Anderson wrote an article about this. How should Christians engage with the culture? Here's a biblical perspective on how to think about it, to help us understand how we can engage with the world around us, because we're not called to be spectators. We are called to engage. That's what suffering for Christ means. It's a pressing question in our day. So all kinds of discussion from both sides about this. We have to start with the Bible on all things, right? It's sola scriptura for a reason. Tota scriptura as well. It's the Bible alone and all of the Bible. That is our standard for faith and practice. So we need a biblical theology of culture. What is culture? If we want to know whether we should engage it or not, what is it? Let's define it. So this is the process of taking, instead of giving you information, we want to try to give you some wisdom here. I'm going to attempt to use the information from my knowledge base and present it as wisdom. It's not my wisdom. It's God's wisdom. There's nothing special about me. But culture in its simplest definition it's what we do with what God has made. It's what human beings do with the created world, the natural world, and the resources that God has given us. The Bible, of course, has a lot to say about the world and what God has made and what we are to do with the world that God has made. So first of all, we want to start in the Bible with the biblical theology of culture. Culture is, you just want to recognize that it's a gift from God. Culture is not this thing that we need to be afraid of or that we need to hate, that we need to distance ourselves from. Culture is a gift from God. It's not something to be feared. It's not something to be inherently opposed. Culture is a part of the goodness of creation. And there is in the Bible what you will find something called a cultural mandate for us to exercise dominion over the created world and to take the resources that God has given and use them for His glory. That means to use it for His glory and for the good of our neighbor, right? That's what it means to be a Christian in this world. But recognize also that just as we are and just as the created world is, culture is also fallen. Christianity has a doctrine of the fall. That is, this world is fallen in sin. Mankind is fallen in sin. Of course, that has an impact on culture because culture is made up of human beings. So the culture around us is always going to be a mixture of good and bad. So we need to exercise great discernment to be able to tell the difference between a God-honoring culture and a God-dishonoring culture. Now, what's really important here is that we need to know, just like we learned from Harari here today, all culture is religious. Everybody is religious, right? The atheists who like to tell you that religion is responsible for all the problems in the world, religion's bad, it's not. Everyone's religious. Mankind is essentially homo religiosus. That means it's our nature to be religious about something. It just means to be committed and dedicated. It means loyalty. All culture reflects some sort of value system, right? That's to identify what someone's religion is. Look at what they value. That's what we did with Harari here. So even a so-called secular culture, which we talk an awful lot about here, even a secular culture is in fact deeply religious at its root. So there's no such thing as a religiously neutral culture of any kind. There's no such thing as a religiously neutral person anywhere. They don't exist. Christians are part of culture. We are affected by the culture around us, and we are called to affect the culture around us. That is the Great Commission. To be salt and light in the world, to purify that which is putrid, to preserve that which is good, to expose that which is dark, or that which is hidden, and to show the way for those around us. So, as we ourselves are part of culture, so we can't separate ourselves from it. We can't isolate ourselves from culture. We are affected by the culture around us, and we are also called to affect the culture around us for better or worse. And the last point is this, the Great Commission. We need to view culture through the lens of the Great Commission. There are many things that we're called to do as Christians to serve God in this world. But the Great Commission, that great calling to take the good news of Christ to the nations, to make disciples of the nations, to bring the teaching of Christ to the nations, to build up the church, that's our priority. You can't do that without engaging. I think sometimes people worry, or the reason they criticize maybe what we do here with engaging these topics is maybe because they think we're giving it too much exposure. I don't know. I'm not sure. But the point about cultural apologetics is to make a defense for the faith. 1 Peter 3:15, to be ready, always be prepared to tell people why you have hope, the reason for the hope that's in you, right? To give a defense. That is apologetics. And to do it with meekness and fear, gentleness and respect. And so the way we relate to culture can help us in fulfilling this Great Commission. In some ways, it can hinder us as well. It's important as Christians to recognize that the Great Commission is one of our priorities. You can argue that it is the top priority. And it is an important lens through which we think about our relationship to the culture around us. Now, we've had comments, and you'll see this article that I've shared with you here on our mobile app and at Substack, where we're specifically responding to one of our commenters. It's our brother Stickman out there. He gave us some questions, some comments, and we responded to him openly in the comments section, and then we turned it into an article. And basically, we want to put it to you this way. Should you engage the culture? Well, if you see a child nearby playing in the street, fast-moving car approaching, you don't just stand there and pray for them. You don't just shout the gospel toward the street. What you do, the Christ-like action, is to love your neighbor and run into harm's way to rescue that child, to preserve the life of one of God's fellow image bearers. That's love in action, right? That would be Christ-like. It wouldn't be Christ-like to stay out of it because it's dangerous. There's a time for being passive and there's a time for action. All right? And what's at stake is clear, folks. All right? The Bible tells us what's at stake. It's the thing we need to be concerned with, folks, is not whether or not we lose our sovereignty. That's important. That's very important. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying, but that's not our first priority. It might even be down somewhere around our third, fourth priority, right? Because first and foremost, it's the Great Commission. That means to make disciples, right? That means to take the gospel to people, to go out in it. You've got to get your hands dirty. You're going to have to get off the couch. This is not going to be done any other way. So I'll share what we did in much more in depth response to Stickman, and we'll share this article with you here. I invite you to go check that out on the Armor of Truth mobile app, and you can check it out at Substack if you happen to be subscribed to our mailing list there. I want to remind you too, please you can go to our website, or in the description below this video, you can sign up for our newsletter. Someone works very hard on that newsletter, and it's one of the most important things that we have, because that's how we can communicate with you if all of this falls apart. And today we have the Armor of Truth mobile app as well to contact, to be able to communicate with you. I want to share a bit of scripture to finish up with. So Romans 1:32, right? We get ourselves. A lot of times we're consumed with the idea that of how sinful that group is. Look at the WHO. Look at the World Economic Forum. Look at Larry Fink. Look at what he's doing today. This is all. Look at the evil. Well, Romans 1:32 says they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. They not only do them, but they give great approval to those who practice them. So they suppress the truth and unrighteousness, and they know God's righteous decree, but they do these things anyway, and they celebrate when others do it with them. That's what Pride Month is all about, is celebrating all those people who want to sin together. And then Romans 2 says, there's an important warning here, I think, that we need. Therefore, you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges, for in passing judgment on one another you condemn yourselves, because you, the judge, practice the very same things. And this is not saying not to judge. It's just saying be aware. Be aware of your own heart, right? Make sure. A good prayer is to ask the Lord to show you your own sin. Right? That's not an easy process. But to be careful as we stand many times in judgment of these, as we make judgments on morality, what's right and wrong about what these folks are up to. We need to make sure that our own hearts, are right, because we know, or the biblical anthropology, we know our condition. We need to be aware of it. And we need to be aware that we're not condemning something that we see happening that we're also doing in some other way, right? If you're going to condemn tyrants in the world, you better not be a tyrant in your own home, right? Something like that. Romans 2 verse 2 says, we know that the judgment of God rightly falls on those who practice such things. Do you suppose, O man, you who judge those who practice such things and yet do them yourself? Do you suppose that you will escape the judgment? Or do you presume on the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience, not knowing that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? right? God isn't kind to us so we can have a good time. He's kind to the world. He's pouring his grace out on the world so that everyone has time to repent. That's the message of the Tower of Babel. It's look how much grace God showed to those people. He didn't wipe them out. He just confused their languages and gave them new lives. Verse 5 says, "But because of your hard, impenitent heart, you're storing up wrath for yourself on the day of wrath when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. And he will render to each one according to his works, to those who by patience and well-doing seek for glory and honor and immortality, he will give eternal life. But for those who are self-seeking, contentious, and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, there will be wrath and fury. There will be tribulation and distress for every human being who does evil without repenting. The Jew first and also the Greek. But glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, who repents and believes in Christ. Because God shows no partiality to the Jew first and also the Greek, because God shows no partiality. Verse 13 says, "For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified." And that is the topic for our next Bible study in the book of James. So keep an eye out for that coming up on the Armor of Truth mobile app very soon. Download the Armor of Truth mobile app, my friends. As of today, we've got almost 100 people signed up for our notifications. Now we've got more than that have downloaded the app, but when we send out the notifications now, they're going out to 100 people. We think that's amazing. So we want to thank you. And on Summer's behalf, she's not with us here in the studio today, but I want to thank you on her behalf too. I don't enjoy this as much when she's not here with me. So thank you, and I'm sure she would say the same. Please download the app. If you can support us, please do so. And if you can't, that's fine. We can use your prayers. First and foremost, we need that more than anything. So God bless you, my friends. We'll see you here again next time.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth, live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.